First Samuel study questions. We're doing it in topics, and the first topic is Samuel's life and calling. What does Hannah's prayer teach? It shows persistence, heartfelt prayer, and trust in God's timing. Why is Samuel's birth significant? He bridges the time between the judges and kings and leads Israel spiritually. What does God's response to Hannah show? God sees personal suffering and responds with care and timing. Why was Eli's household judged? Because of corruption and failure in leadership accountability. And what does Samuel's calling teach? It teaches listening and obeying God's voice. The second topic is Israel demands a king. Why did Israel want a king? They wanted to be like other nations and struggled to trust God directly. How did Israel misuse the ark? They treated it like a lucky object instead of honoring God. Samuel's response to Israel's request. He prays, and God says they are rejecting him as king. What warning about kingship was given? Human kings will bring burdens like taxes and control. Key lesson of this section. Trusting human systems over God leads to disappointment. Saul becoming king. Why Saul was chosen? He matched Israel's outward expectations of leadership. What did Saul's anointing show? God still works despite human motives. Saul's early humility. He initially saw doubt and modesty. But why was Samuel's farewell matters? It reminds Israel God is still their true king. And requirement for success, obedience from both the king and people. Saul's downfall begins. Saul's sacrifice mistake. He disobeyed by acting without waiting for Samuel. Why obedience over sacrifice? God values a submitted heart more than rituals. Meaning of obedience statement. God desires full surrender, not selective obedience. And why rejected? Repeated disobedience revealed heart issues. David's rise. Why David was chosen. God values heart over appearance. Meaning of God sees heart. God looks at motives and faith. David versus Goliath, faith. David trusts God, others fear. Lessons from Goliath. Faith enables victory over giants. Why courage matters. True courage comes from trusting God. Saul and David's contrast. Why Saul was jealous. David's success threatened his insecurity. Effective jealousy. It distorts judgment and leads to harm. David sprawling with Saul. He refuses revenge and honors God. David versus Saul with power. David waits. Saul grabs control. Lessons on timing. God promises requires patience. Saul's final days. Saul's final mistakes. Continued disobedience and fear. Why consult a medium? He turned away from God in desperation. What happens when leaders abandon God? They become unstable and destructive. Saul versus David in the end. Saul declines and David rises. A lesson from Saul. Ignoring God leads to collapse. Why demand a king? This was their key questions. They rejected God's direct leadership for human control. Saul versus David differences. Saul is fear driven, David is faith driven. Why heart over appearance? God sees true character and motives. The lessons of partial obedience.